The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a deep rumbling sound that echoed across the vast hall. Ambassador Lisa Carter stepped through the entrance and felt her breath catch in her throat. She had seen pictures and video, feeds of this place, but being here in person was something entirely different. The chamber stretched out before her like a cathedral made of crystal and metal, with thousands of seats arranged in perfect circles that rose up toward a domed ceiling that seemed to shimmer with its own light. Lisa walked slowly down the central aisle, her footsteps making small clicking sounds on the polished floor. Behind her, Commander Jake Morrison followed at a respectful distance, his military uniform crisp and perfect despite the long journey from Earth. Captain Nina Rodriguez walked beside him, her diplomatic credentials hanging from a silver chain around her neck. The three humans looked impossibly small in the enormous space, like children who had wandered into a palace built for giants. All around them, the representatives of dozens of alien species watched their approach with expressions that ranged from mild curiosity to barely hidden amusement. The Zephyrians sat in their section to the left, their bodies looking like they were carved from living crystal. When they were amused, their entire forms would sparkle and flash with colors that had no names in human language. Right now, they were sparkling quite a lot. The Gorvani delegates occupied a much larger section near the back of the chamber. Each one stood nearly 3 meters tall and had skin that looked like gray stone. When they found something funny, they would make deep rumbling sounds that could be felt through the floor. Lisa could feel those rumbles now, vibrating up through her legs and into her chest. Elder Mira Stone, the most senior human diplomat, was already seated in the small section reserved for Earth's delegation. She had arrived 2 days earlier to prepare for this moment. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face showed no emotion as she watched Lisa approach. Mira had spent 30 years in diplomatic service, but this was her first time representing humanity to an entire galaxy of alien civilizations. Dr. Helen Walsh sat beside Mira, her tablet computer open on her lap and her fingers moving quickly across its surface. Helen was Earth's leading expert on galactic history and alien cultures. She had spent the past 5 years studying every piece of information that humanity had gathered about the various species in the Galactic Council. Her research had revealed fascinating details about ancient wars, cultural traditions, and the complex relationships between different alien societies. The chamber continued to fill with representatives as the official session time approached. The bird-like Ashanti delegates perched on specially designed stands that allowed them to spread their colorful wings. Their sharp beaks clicked together in rapid patterns that served as their form of quiet conversation. The aquatic Nereid representatives floated in large transparent tanks filled with a blue-green liquid that bubbled and swirled around their fish-like bodies. When they communicated, waves of colored light would pulse across their skin in beautiful patterns. The reptilian delegates from the Saras Confederation occupied a heated section of the chamber, their scales gleaming under the warm lights that had been installed specifically for their comfort. Some of them were nearly 4 meters long, with powerful tails that they used for both balance and communication. When a Saros was skeptical about something, they would slowly move their tail from side to side in a motion that reminded humans of a cat preparing to pounce. At exactly the appointed time, a deep chime rang out across the chamber. Every conversation stopped immediately, and all eyes turned toward the raised platform at the center of the hall. The prime speaker of the hegemony rose from his ornate chair, his 4 arms spreading wide in a gesture of welcome and authority. Vos Kelith was a Thrakari, one of the oldest and most respected species in the galactic community. His people had been exploring space for over 10,000 years, and they served as the primary leadership of the council. He stood nearly 2.5 meters tall, with skin that had a golden metallic sheen. His four arms moved independently of each other, allowing him to gesture in complex patterns that conveyed multiple meanings simultaneously. "We gather today to welcome our newest members," Vos Kaleth announced, his voice carrying easily across the vast chamber thanks to the Universal Translation System. "The species known as humanity has requested full membership in our ancient alliance." Lisa felt her heart beating faster as thousands of alien eyes focused on the small human delegation. She had practiced her speech dozens of times during the journey from Earth, but now the words seemed to stick in her throat. "The humans have made remarkable progress in a very short time," Vos Kaleth continued. "In less than 200 years, they have developed space travel, established colonies on multiple worlds, and created technologies that have impressed even our most advanced scientists." Murmurs of agreement rippled through some sections of the chamber, but Lisa noticed that many delegates remained silent. The sparkling from the Zephyrian section had increased, and the rumbling from the Gorvani had taken on a different tone. However, Vos Kaleth said, raising one of his four hands for silence, "Membership in our alliance requires more than technological advancement. It requires an understanding of the ancient bonds that hold our civilizations together. It requires knowledge of the traditions that have guided us through countless conflicts and challenges." Lisa finally found her voice and stood up from her seat. "Prime Speaker, humanity is honored by the opportunity to join this alliance. We understand that we are young compared to your ancient civilizations, but we believe that our perspective and abilities can contribute to the strength of this community." The chamber fell completely silent for a moment. Then, slowly, a new sound began to emerge. It started as a low chuckling from the Gorvani section, then spread to the clicking of Ashanti beaks, then to the rapid sparkles of light from the Zephyrian delegates. Within seconds, the entire chamber was filled with the sounds of alien laughter. Vos Kaleth raised his hands again, but this time his gesture seemed more condescending than authoritative. "Ambassador Carter, your enthusiasm is refreshing, but I fear you do not understand the nature of our alliance. We are bound together not merely by treaties and trade agreements, but by the warrior traditions that have been tested in the fires of ancient conflicts." Another delegate stood up from the Saros section. His scales were a deep red color, and his yellow eyes seemed to glow in the chamber's light. "Prime Speaker, if I may address our new friends directly?" He turned toward the human delegation. "Young humans, your people have experienced only one significant planetary conflict in recent memory. Your world war lasted a mere 6 years and involved primitive chemical weapons and simple aircraft. What could you possibly know of the warrior? Songs that bind our peoples together?" Dr. Helen Walsh looked up from her tablet, her expression thoughtful. She had spent countless hours studying the military histories of these civilizations, learning about their ancient conflicts and the cultural traditions that had emerged from centuries of warfare. But now, listening to their dismissive words, she began to see patterns that she had not noticed before. The Ashanti delegate, who spoke next, had bright blue and green feathers that ruffled with excitement as she addressed the chamber. "The humans are farmers and builders. They create peaceful settlements and focus on commerce and technology. These are admirable qualities, but they are not the qualities of warriors. They do not understand the sacred songs that teach us how to move in battle, how to strike with honor, how to defend our people with the wisdom of our ancestors." Lisa felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger, but she forced herself to remain calm. Commander Morrison stepped forward slightly, his hand resting on the ceremonial sword that was part of his dress uniform. Captain Rodriguez maintained her diplomatic composure, but her jaw was clenched tight. Vos Kaleth nodded approvingly at the other delegates' comments. "The alliance has survived for 10,000 years because we understand the deep connections between warfare, honor, and survival. Our war songs are not mere military tactics. They are the spiritual foundation of our civilizations. They teach us not just how to fight, but why we fight and what we are fighting to preserve. Elder Myra Stone finally stood up, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber despite her advanced age. Prime Speaker, distinguished delegates, humanity may be young, but we are not ignorant of warfare or sacrifice. Our history may be brief compared to yours, but it is filled with examples of courage, strategy, and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. The laughter that followed Myra's words was even louder than before. The myriad delegates sent waves of dismissive colors across their tank walls. The Gorvani rumbled with what was clearly amusement rather than respect. Your history spans less than 10,000 years total, called out another Thrakari delegate. Our war songs alone are older than your entire civilization. You speak of courage and strategy, but you have never faced an enemy that could threaten your entire species. You have never had to make the choices that forge true warriors. Dr. Helen Walsh closed her tablet and stood up slowly. 3 weeks had passed since the humiliating session at the Galactic Council, and the human delegation had returned to Earth with heavy hearts and bitter memories. Ambassador Lisa Carter sat in her office at the Global Defense Headquarters, staring out the window at the blue sky that seemed so peaceful compared to the vast dangers lurking among the stars. The rejection still stung, but worse than that was the feeling that humanity had somehow failed a test they never knew they were taking. Morning started like any other until the emergency communication system began broadcasting urgent signals across all channels. Lisa rushed to the main command center where dozens of technicians were working frantically at their stations. The huge display screens showed star maps with red warning indicators flashing across multiple sectors of space. General Paul Carter, Lisa's husband and the commander of Earth's small but advanced space fleet, stood at the center of the chaos with his arms crossed and his face grim. His 30 years of military service had prepared him for many different kinds of crises, but nothing quite like this. Around him, his staff officers were receiving reports from across the galaxy, each one worse than the last. "What's the situation?" Lisa asked as she approached the command console. Paul turned to face her, his expression mixing concern with something that might have been relief. "We're getting emergency broadcasts from the Galactic Council. The border systems are under attack by something called the Void Collective. Apparently, it's some kind of machine intelligence that's been dormant for centuries." Lieutenant Colonel Amy Davis looked up from her communication station, her headset still crackling with incoming messages. "General, I'm receiving priority communications from multiple hegemony fleets. They're requesting immediate assistance from any available ships, regardless of species or alliance status." Captain Ben Thompson, the pilot of Earth's most advanced stealth frigate, let out a short laugh that had no humor in it. "So now they want our help? 3 weeks ago, we weren't good enough to be real members of their club, but suddenly, we're acceptable. When they're getting their butts kicked by a bunch of machines?" Paul held up his hand for silence. "Captain, I understand your feelings, but this is bigger than our wounded pride. If the Void Collective is as dangerous as these reports suggest, then every inhabited world in the galaxy could be at risk. That includes Earth." Dr. Helen Walsh entered the command center carrying a stack of data tablets and looking like she hadn't slept in days. Since returning from the council session, she had thrown herself into researching everything she could find about galactic military history, driven by the nagging feeling that she was missing something important. "General, I've been analyzing the tactical reports that are coming in from the battle zones," Helen said, spreading her tablets across a nearby table. "The Void Collective isn't just attacking randomly. They're using specific formations and strategies that match historical patterns from the various hegemony species." Commander Jake Morrison leaned over to examine Helen's data. "You mean the machines studied their military history?" "It's more complicated than that," Helen replied, pulling up a series of star charts that showed the movement patterns of both the attacking machines and the defending alien fleets. Look at these formations. The collective is using the Thrakari, Hammer of Justice maneuver, but it's the original version from over 3,000 years ago. Here, they're executing the Zephyrian Crystal Storm attack pattern, but again, it's the ancient version that hasn't been used in modern warfare for centuries. Admiral Susan Blake, who had just arrived from the orbital shipyards where Earth's fleet was being prepared for deployment, studied the tactical displays with growing interest. Dr. Walsh, are you saying that these machines somehow learned military tactics that the aliens themselves have forgotten? Not forgotten, Helen corrected. Modified. Over thousands of years, each species refined and improved their traditional war songs and battle formations. They made them more efficient, more civilized, more suitable for the kind of formal warfare that developed between allied species. But the collective is using the raw, original versions. Paul Carter walked over to examine the data more closely. And the current hegemony forces can't counter these ancient tactics because they've been trained in the modern versions? Exactly, Helen said, her voice growing more excited as she explained her theory. It's like the difference between classical music and jazz. The modern versions are more refined and predictable, but they've lost the wild, improvisational spirit that made the originals so effective in real combat. Captain Nina Rodriguez, who had been listening quietly from her position near the communication center, suddenly spoke up. Dr. Walsh, if you know what the original tactics were, does that mean you might know how to counter them? Helen paused, her mind racing through years of research and countless hours spent studying the military histories of dozens of alien civilizations. I might know something even better than that. I think I know where these tactics originally came from and why they were developed in the first place. The command center fell silent, except for the constant hum of computers and communication equipment. Everyone was looking at Helen, waiting for her to continue. 3 weeks ago, at the council session, I asked a question that seemed to surprise everyone, Helen said slowly. I asked why all of their ancient war songs seemed designed to counter human-style tactics. At the time, I thought it was just an interesting coincidence. Lieutenant Mark Johnson, the chief communications officer, frowned in confusion. But Dr. Walsh, humans and these alien species never met before we developed space travel. How could their ancient tactics be designed to fight us? That's exactly the right question, Helen replied with a smile that was both excited and slightly frightening. And I think I'm starting to understand the answer. These species didn't develop their war songs to fight each other. They developed them to fight a theoretical enemy, a hypothetical opponent that their military strategists imagined based on mathematical models and strategic projections. Admiral Blake leaned forward intently. And you think that theoretical enemy was supposed to be like humans? I think it was exactly like humans, Helen said firmly. Consider the evidence. Their tactics emphasize formal challenges, honor-bound responses, and predictable battle formations. They're designed to counter an enemy that would be unpredictable, adaptable, and willing to use any strategy necessary to win. They're designed to fight an opponent that would ignore traditional rules of warfare and focus entirely on achieving victory through superior creativity and determination. The implications of Helen's theory began to sink in around the command center. If she was right, then the entire military tradition of the galactic hegemony had been developed specifically to counter human-style warfare, even though the two sides had never actually fought each other. General Carter turned to address his staff. How many ships can we deploy immediately? We have 12 heavy cruisers ready for combat, along with 36 frigates and about 200 smaller patrol craft. Admiral Blake reported. It's not much compared to the hegemony fleets, but our ships are equipped with the most advanced technology we've been able to develop. And our crews? Paul asked. Captain Thompson grinned for the first time since the crisis had begun. Our crews know how to think on their feet, General. We've been training them in asymmetric warfare and adaptive tactics since the space program began. If Dr. Walsh is right about the nature of this conflict, then our people might be exactly what the galaxy needs right now. Paul Carter made his decision with the quick certainty that had made him an effective military commander. Prepare the fleet for immediate deployment. We're going to help our galactic neighbors, whether they think we're worthy allies or not. Dr. Helen Walsh gathered up her data tablets and headed toward the door. General, I'd like to accompany the fleet. If my theories are correct, then understanding the historical context of this conflict could be crucial to developing effective countermeasures. Granted, Paul replied without hesitation. Admiral Blake, Dr. Walsh will serve as your historical and tactical advisor. Captain Thompson, I want your stealth frigate scouting ahead of the main fleet. Commander Morrison, you'll coordinate fighter squadrons. As the command center erupted into organized activity, with officers rushing to their stations and communication channels buzzing with deployment orders, Lisa Carter felt a strange mixture of pride and apprehension. Humanity was about to face its first major test in galactic warfare, fighting alongside the same species that had mocked them just weeks earlier. The irony was not lost on her that Earth's inexperienced military was being called upon to help solve a crisis that the ancient warrior civilizations could not handle on their own. But as she watched her husband and his staff prepare for what could be the most important battle in human history, she felt confident that humanity would prove its worth in the way that mattered most. Within 6 hours, the entire Earth defense fleet was moving through hyperspace toward the embattled border systems, carrying with them the hopes of both humanity and the galaxy itself. The Kepler 442 system had once been home to thriving colonies and busy trade routes, but now it looked like a graveyard of broken ships and shattered dreams. Admiral Susan Blake stood on the bridge of the heavy cruiser Defiance and watched the tactical display with growing alarm. Dozens of hegemony vessels drifted through space as lifeless hulks, their hulls torn open by weapons that seemed to cut through advanced armor like it was made of paper. The human fleet had arrived just in time to witness the tail end of a massive battle between the galactic hegemony forces and the mysterious Void Collective. What they saw was not encouraging. The alien ships that had seemed so impressive and intimidating at the council session were now fleeing in complete disorder, abandoning their positions and leaving behind the wreckage of what had clearly been a devastating defeat. Dr. Helen Walsh stood beside Admiral Blake, her eyes fixed on the enemy formations that were still visible on the long-range sensors. The Void Collective ships were unlike anything in the human databases. They appeared to be constructed from some kind of black metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their hulls were smooth and featureless, with no visible weapons or engines, yet they moved through space with deadly precision and unleashed devastating firepower. Admiral, I'm counting at least 300 collective vessels in various formations throughout the system, reported Lieutenant Sarah Martinez from her sensor station. They're arranged in patterns that match the historical battle formations I studied back on Earth. Captain Nina Rodriguez, now serving as Admiral Blake's tactical coordinator, pulled up a series of star charts on her personal display. Dr. Walsh, can you identify which specific formations they're using? Helen moved to the main tactical console and began highlighting different groups of enemy ships. That formation there, with the ships arranged in a diamond pattern with trailing wings, that's the classic Thrakari, Claw of Vengeance maneuver. It's designed to break through enemy lines and then sweep back to attack from behind. She pointed to another group of ships that were moving in a complex spiral pattern. And those ships are executing the Zephyrian Crystal Storm formation. It's meant to confuse enemy targeting systems while concentrating firepower on specific weak points. Admiral Blake studied the patterns with growing understanding. But if the hegemony species develop these tactics, why can't they counter them effectively? Because what we're seeing here isn't the modern version of these maneuvers, Helen explained, her voice growing more excited as she recognized additional patterns. The collective is using the original, pure versions of these tactics from thousands of years ago. Look at the timing and spacing of their movements. It's mathematically perfect, with no allowances for the kinds of modifications and improvements that the hegemony forces have made over the centuries. Captain Ben Thompson's voice crackled over the communication system from his stealth frigate Nighthawk, which was conducting reconnaissance at the edge of the system. Admiral, I'm observing the enemy formations from close range, and Dr. Walsh is absolutely right. These machines are fighting like they have a perfect textbook knowledge of ancient alien warfare, but they don't seem to understand the psychological or cultural elements that made those tactics work. Commander Jake Morrison, coordinating the human fighter squadrons from the assault ship Ranger, added his own observations. The collective ships respond to threats exactly the way the old military manuals say they should, but they don't adapt when unexpected situations arise. It's like they're following a script that was written thousands of years ago. Dr. Walsh felt pieces of a massive puzzle clicking into place in her mind. Admiral, I need to access the historical databases immediately. I think I'm beginning to understand not just what the collective is doing, but why it's so effective against the current hegemony forces. She rushed to a workstation and began pulling up files that she had studied during her years of research into galactic military history. The information that appeared on her screen confirmed her growing suspicions and revealed connections that she had never noticed before. Admiral Blake, look at this, Helen said, displaying a series of ancient documents on the main screen. These are strategic planning documents from various hegemony species, dating back between 5,000 and 10,000 years. They all describe theoretical combat scenarios against what they called the unknown enemy, or the hypothetical opponent. Captain Rodriguez leaned forward to read the translated text. Dr. Walsh, these documents seem to be describing military tactics designed to fight against an enemy that doesn't exist yet. Exactly, Helen replied with growing excitement. Each of these civilizations independently developed military doctrines based on mathematical models of what they thought would be the most dangerous possible enemy. They asked themselves, what if we had to fight an opponent that was completely unpredictable, totally adaptable, and absolutely determined to win at any cost? Admiral Blake began to see the implications, and the Void Collective somehow gained access to these theoretical battle plans. It's more than that, Helen said, pulling up additional files. The collective isn't just using the battle plans. It's using the enemy response patterns that were developed to counter the theoretical, human-like opponent. When the ancient alien strategists designed their war songs and battle formations, they had to imagine how their hypothetical enemy would respond. Those imagined responses became part of their military doctrine. Lieutenant Mark Johnson looked up from his communication station with a puzzled expression. But Dr. Walsh, if the alien civilizations designed their tactics to fight human-like enemies, why are the tactics working so well against the aliens themselves? Helen smiled as the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Because over thousands of years, the hegemony species refined and improved their military traditions. They made them more civilized, more predictable, more suitable for warfare. Between allied species who shared common values and honor codes, they essentially turned themselves into the kind of formal, predictable opponents that their ancient tactics were designed to defeat. The bridge fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications of this revelation. A galactic hegemony had spent millennia preparing to fight humanity, but in the process, they had become vulnerable to their own ancient strategies. Admiral, we're receiving a priority distress call from the Zephyrian flagship. reported Lieutenant Martinez. They're requesting immediate assistance. Their formation has been completely disrupted, and they're taking heavy casualties. Admiral. Blake made her decision without hesitation. All ships, prepare for combat operations. Dr. Walsh, can you teach us how to counter these ancient tactics? Helen looked around the bridge at the faces of the human crew members, seeing determination and intelligence that reminded her why she had spent so many years studying the military traditions of other species. Admiral, I can do something better than that. I can teach you the human tactics that these alien strategies were originally designed to counter. She moved to the tactical console and began displaying formation patterns that would have been familiar to military commanders throughout human history. The beautiful thing about human warfare is that we never developed formal battle songs or predictable maneuvers. We've always relied on adaptability, creativity, and the willingness to do whatever it takes to survive. Captain Thompson's voice came over the communication system again. Dr. Walsh, are you saying that our natural fighting style is exactly what's needed to counter the collective? I'm saying that humanity has been unconsciously developing counters to these tactics for our entire military history. Helen replied, we just never knew we were preparing to fight an enemy that was using strategies designed specifically to defeat us. Admiral Blake felt a surge of confidence as she looked around her bridge at the human crew members who had been dismissed as inexperienced children just weeks earlier. All ships, this is Admiral Blake. We're going to show the galaxy what human warfare really looks like. Dr. Walsh will coordinate tactical intelligence. All units, prepare to engage the enemy using adaptive human combat doctrines. As the human fleet moved toward the battle zone, Helen Walsh realized that they were about to participate in a conflict that had been building for 10,000 years, even though neither side had known it was coming. The battle began the moment the human fleet entered the engagement zone, but it was unlike any conflict that the galaxy had witnessed in thousands of years. The Void collective ships immediately detected the new arrivals and began adjusting their formations according to their ancient programming, expecting the humans to respond with the formal challenges and predictable maneuvers that had defined galactic warfare for centuries. Instead, the human ships did something that confused the collective's tactical computers completely. They scattered. Commander Jake Morrison led his squadron of fighters in a pattern that would have been familiar to any human military historian, but looked like complete chaos to observers who expected neat formations and coordinated group movements. His pilots spread out across a wide area of space, each one moving independently while maintaining communication through encrypted channels that changed frequency every few seconds. All Falcon Squadron, remember what Dr. Walsh taught us, Morrison said into his radio as his fighter dove toward a group of collective ships that were trying to form the traditional Soros hammer strike formation. These machines expect us to fight fair and follow rules. Let's disappoint them. The human fighters attacked from 12 different directions simultaneously, targeting the gaps between enemy ships rather than engaging them in direct combat. The collective vessels tried to respond with their programmed defensive maneuvers. They found that there was no central formation to counter, no predictable pattern to disrupt. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, piloting her fighter through a complex spiral that took her between two massive collective vessels, reported her observations to the rest of the squadron. The enemy ships are trying to execute the Guardian's Shield defensive pattern, but they keep hesitating because our attack doesn't match any of their programmed responses. Captain Ben Thompson's stealth frigate Nighthawk demonstrated another aspect of human warfare that the ancient alien strategists had tried to counter but never fully understood. While the collective ships focused on the visible human fighters, Thompson's vessel approached from an unexpected angle, using electromagnetic stealth technology to mask its presence until it was close enough to strike at the enemy's most vulnerable points. Nighthawk to all units, Thompson reported, as his ship fired precisely targeted missiles at the sensor arrays of 3 collective vessels. The enemy's tactical programming assumes that stealth attacks will come from specific directions and follow predictable patterns. They're not prepared for truly random strike tactics. The collective ships that lost their sensors began firing blindly into space, following emergency protocols that had been designed to counter theoretical stealth attacks. But human stealth doctrine had evolved from centuries of actual combat experience, not theoretical models, and Thompson's approach didn't match any of the patterns that the enemy had been programmed to expect. Admiral Susan Blake watched the tactical display from the bridge of the Defiance and felt a mixture of pride and amazement as she saw her forces implementing the strategies that Dr. Helen Walsh had described. The human ships moved like a jazz band, improvising a complex musical piece, with each unit responding to the others while maintaining its own creative approach to the problem. Admiral, the collective formations are beginning to break down, reported Captain Ninia Rodriguez from her position at the tactical console. Their ships are designed to work together in coordinated groups, but our scattered attack pattern is forcing them to operate as individuals, and their programming doesn't seem to handle that situation very well. Dr. Walsh, monitoring the battle from her station near the main communications array, felt a deep satisfaction as she watched her theories being proven correct in the most dramatic way possible. Admiral, the collective ships are trying to revert to even older tactical patterns, but each time they do, they become more vulnerable to human-style warfare. The engagement intensified as more collective vessels entered the battle zone, but instead of overwhelming the smaller human force, their numbers actually worked against them. The ancient tactical programming that guided their movements required precise coordination between multiple units, and the chaotic nature of human combat made the coordination impossible to maintain. Commander Morrison led his fighters in what military historians would later describe as the most effective use of swarm tactics ever recorded. Each pilot operated independently while sharing information through a constantly changing network of communication links that prevented the enemy from predicting or intercepting their coordination efforts. Falcon leader to all squadrons, Morrison announced as his formation swept through a group of collective ships that were trying to execute the classic Thrakari starburst maneuver. The enemy is attempting to surround and destroy us using the same pattern they used against the Zephyrian fleet 2 hours ago. Let's show them why that won't work against humans. The human fighters responded by doing something that no formal military doctrine would have recommended. They flew directly into the center of the enemy formation and scattered in all directions like an explosion of metal and energy. The collective ships, programmed to counter attempts to break out of encirclement, found themselves surrounded instead, with human fighters attacking from every possible angle. Lieutenant Martinez pushed her fighter to its maximum speed as she wove between the hulking enemy vessels, firing at their weapon systems and engine components rather than trying to destroy them outright. The ancient alien tactics assume that an enemy will try to win through direct confrontation, she reported. They're not prepared for an opponent that focuses on disruption and confusion rather than destruction. Captain Thompson's Nighthawk continued to demonstrate the effectiveness of truly unpredictable warfare by appearing in locations where no enemy sensors could detect it and striking at targets that the collective's programming considered too minor to defend heavily. His attacks on communication arrays and navigation systems created cascading failures throughout the enemy fleet. Nighthawk to Fleet Command, Thompson reported as he watched 3 collective ships collide with each other after losing their coordination. Systems. The enemy relies on perfect information and flawless communication between units. Every time we disrupt their data flow, their entire tactical framework starts to collapse. The battle continued for several hours with the human fleet, steadily gaining the upper hand despite being outnumbered by more than 10 to 1. The key to their success was not superior technology or overwhelming firepower, but rather their willingness to abandon conventional tactics and fight in ways that the enemy's ancient programming could not predict or counter. Dr. Walsh monitored the communications channels and realized that word of the battle was spreading throughout the galaxy as surviving hegemony ships transmitted reports of what they were witnessing. For the first time in galactic history, the theoretical human enemy that alien civilizations had spent millennia preparing to fight was actually fighting, and the reality was far different from anything their strategists had imagined. Admiral Blake, I'm receiving priority communications from multiple hegemony fleets throughout the sector, reported Lieutenant Mark Johnson from his station. They're requesting permission to observe our tactical methods and asking for guidance on how to implement similar strategies. Admiral Blake smiled as she watched another group of collective ships break formation after failing to cope with a coordinated attack by human fighters that approached from 17 different vectors simultaneously. Tell them they're welcome to watch and learn, Lieutenant. But remind them that human warfare isn't something you can learn from a textbook. As the tide of battle turned decisively in favor of the human fleet, the Void Collective began implementing increasingly desperate tactics drawn from the deepest archives of ancient military programming. But each new strategy they tried only served to demonstrate further the fundamental difference between theoretical warfare and the brutal, creative reality of human combat doctrine. The ancient alien strategists had imagined an enemy that would be unpredictable and adaptable, but they had never truly understood what those qualities meant when translated into actual battlefield conditions. They had prepared to fight humans for 10,000 years, but they had been preparing to fight the wrong kind of humans entirely. The Battle of Kepler 442 ended not with a massive explosion or dramatic final clash, but with something far more remarkable. The remaining Void Collective ships simply stopped fighting and began broadcasting surrender signals in languages that hadn't been used for thousands of years. Their ancient programming had finally reached a conclusion that their creators had never intended. The theoretical enemy they had been designed to defeat was too unpredictable to overcome using formal military doctrine. Admiral Susan Blake stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched as the last of the enemy vessels powered down their weapons and drifted silently through space, like monuments to a conflict that had lasted far longer than anyone had realized. Around her, the crew members who had been dismissed as inexperienced newcomers just weeks earlier were now being hailed as heroes by the same alien civilizations that had mocked them. Dr. Helen Walsh felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she compiled the final battle reports and prepared to send them back to Earth and to the Galactic Council. The data she had gathered during the conflict would revolutionize the understanding of galactic military history and prove that humanity's approach to warfare was not primitive or crude, but rather the natural evolution of combat doctrine that alien civilizations had been trying to achieve for millennia. Admiral, I'm receiving priority communications from the Galactic Council, reported Lieutenant Mark Johnson from his communication station. Prime Speaker Vos Kelleth is requesting immediate conference with you and Dr. Walsh. The main view screen activated to show the interior of the council chamber, but this time the atmosphere was completely different from the mocking reception that the humans had received during their first visit. Representatives from dozens of species stood in respectful silence as Vos Kelleth approached the communication podium with all four of his arms extended in a gesture of deep respect. Admiral Blake, Dr. Walsh, Commander Morrison, and all members of the human fleet, Vos Kelleth began, his translated voice carrying none of the condescension that had marked their previous interaction. We owe you not only our gratitude for your assistance in this crisis, but also our apologies for our previous treatment of your people. Captain Nina Rodriguez, standing beside Admiral Blake, felt a mixture of pride and vindication as she watched the same aliens who had laughed at humanity's military inexperience now speaking to them with obvious respect and admiration. Prime. Speaker, we appreciate your words, Admiral Blake replied diplomatically. But our primary concern was protecting all inhabited worlds from the Void collective threat. The safety of the galaxy is more important than any personal grievances. Vos Keleth's expression, though alien, clearly conveyed deep emotion. Admiral, you do not understand the full significance of what has occurred here. Dr. Walsh, your research into our ancient military traditions has revealed something that we ourselves had forgotten, something that changes our understanding of our own history. Dr. Walsh stepped forward, her mind still processing the implications of everything she had learned during the battle. Prime Speaker, I believe I'm beginning to understand the connections between our civilizations that go back much further than any of us realized. Please explain what you have discovered, Vos Keleth requested, and his tone carried the respect due to a scholar whose theories had just been proven correct in the most dramatic way possible. Helen took a deep breath and began to share the conclusions that had emerged from her analysis of the battle data and historical records. 10,000 years ago, your various civilizations independently developed military doctrines based on theoretical models of what they considered to be the most dangerous possible enemy. They asked themselves, what would we do if we had to fight an opponent that was completely unpredictable, absolutely adaptable, and totally determined to win regardless of conventional rules or honor codes? Elder Quintus of the Zephyrian Confederation peered on a secondary communication channel, his crystalline features reflecting patterns of light that indicated deep thought. Dr. Walsh, you are suggesting that our ancestors were modeling their strategic planning on an enemy that resembled humanity? I'm suggesting something even more remarkable than that, Helen replied with growing excitement. Your ancestors weren't just modeling a theoretical enemy that happened to resemble humans. They were modeling humans specifically, even though they had never encountered us. The communication channels fell silent as representatives from across the galaxy absorbed the implications of this statement. Captain Ben Thompson, participating in the conference from his stealth frigate, was the first to speak. Dr. Walsh, how could alien civilizations thousands of light years apart all independently develop military strategies designed to counter human tactics before they ever met humans? Helen smiled as she prepared to share the most remarkable discovery of her research. Because they didn't develop those strategies independently. There's evidence in the ancient records that all of these civilizations received guidance from a source they described as the Watchers or the Ancient Ones. These mysterious advisors provided strategic consulting to developing military cultures throughout the galaxy. Commander Jake Morrison, still aboard his fighter in the aftermath of the battle, felt a chill run down his spine. Dr. Walsh, are you saying that some unknown alien species was teaching everyone else how to fight humans? Before humans even developed space travel? I'm saying that someone or something with advanced knowledge of human psychology and military potential was preparing the galaxy for our eventual arrival, Helen replied. The Watchers knew that humans would eventually reach the stars, and they wanted to ensure that when we did, the established civilizations would be ready to defend themselves. Vos Keleth's four arms moved in complex patterns that conveyed amazement and respect. Dr. Walsh, this would mean that our entire military tradition, the war songs that define our civilizations, were created specifically as countermeasures to human warfare. But here's the truly remarkable part, Helen continued. Over thousands of years, your civilizations refined and improved these anti-human tactics until they became formal, predictable, and civilized. You turned them into the kind of honorable warfare that could be practiced between allied species. In the process, you made yourselves vulnerable to the very strategies your ancestors had been designed to counter. Admiral Blake began to understand the full scope of what had happened. So when the Void Collective used the original, unmodified versions of these tactics against the current hegemony forces, they were using pure anti-human warfare against civilizations that had forgotten. How to fight like humans, Helen finished. Only actual humans could counter tactics that were specifically designed to defeat human-style combat. The revelation transformed the entire context of the recent conflict and humanity's place in galactic civilization. The species that had mocked humans for their lack of ancient warrior traditions now realized that human warfare was the foundation upon which all of their traditions had been built. "There is one more thing that must be said," Vaskelef announced, his voice carrying the weight of formal proclamation. "The Galactic Council hereby recognizes humanity not as junior members of our alliance, but as the inheritors of the most ancient military wisdom in the galaxy. Your war songs are older than our civilizations, even though you developed them independently on a single world." Dr. Walsh felt tears in her eyes as she realized that humanity had finally found its place among the stars, not as students of alien wisdom, but as the teachers of truths that the galaxy had been waiting 10,000 years to remember. The communication ended with formal invitations for human military advisors to work with every major civilization in the galaxy, sharing the combat. Doctrines that had proven so effective against an enemy that had been designed specifically to defeat them. As the human fleet prepared for the journey home, Admiral Blake made a final log entry that would become part of galactic history. "Today we learned that humanity has been singing the galaxy's war songs since before we knew there was a galaxy to sing to. We just never realized that the universe had been listening."